Welcome once again to the Talking Archive. My name is Josh Jacobs, and our conversation continues now with Tom Kennington, former radio disc jockey, program director, as well as the head of marketing and promotions at Walt Disney World. Now, Tom, you also kind of described WSCI as kind of like WKRP in a sense. Looking back, how is that so? I'm just kind of curious. Any stories that you have that were reflected later on in that iconic sitcom?
Oh, gosh. Some of the jocks we had were kind of reminiscent of some of the personalities on the show. I worked with, if not just at SCI, but I worked with it in my radio career with a personality like every single one of those on KRP, except I never worked for an incompetent general manager. Like what was there. Every general manager I had was a good one. But as far as the person, I worked with a Dr. Johnny Fever, and I worked with all the other characters on the show who had similar personalities. Because as you meet some of the strangest personalities in radio. But the thing is that they were all just wonderful people. Mm-hmm. There was they had some different personalities and all that, but there was never. I was fortunate enough. I never worked with any people or at any station where there was animosity, where there was any kind of jealousy. Everybody pulled together and worked, and we just all admired each other's work, and it was great. And like I said, working when I first got there, I worked with Dusty, and then with Dave Reinhardt, who came down to wound up managing FLA over in Tampa years later. But all the people that I worked with, were just really great people, and some of us have stayed in touch. To be quite honest with you, because of the ages, many of them have passed on. But in fact, all of the ones that I worked with that I was closest with have passed on except one. I don't know if you know some of these names, may not mean anything to you, but Gary Schaefer or Dutch Schaefer, Dutch Holland, Mike Ranieri, also down at FUN with Don Wright, who did Nighttime, was a very, very dear friend. Perry Moore here at DBO. But the one that I was really close with, who is still alive but is having a great deal of physical issues, is Tom Darren. And he was a PD when I was national PD of Jacksonville, and became a very, very good friend. Mm-hmm. But he's going through some very difficult times right now. So they were, just like I say, delightful people. And even now, after all these years, after being out of it, another one I worked with at DBO was Jim Turner, and Jim and I still stay in touch. He's still in the area, and we have lunch every so often. So probably he and Darren are the two that I worked with, still around that were good friends when we worked. Oh, and the other one was, and this one blows people's mind. Believe it or not, I was the first person to give Morton Downey Jr. a talk show.
Wow.
He was doing, believe it or not, he was on DBO FM. Now, when I became PD, he was on FM. He came into my office one day, and I said, "Are you the same Doc Downey that was down at FUN?" He said, "Yes." And because he was there before I got there. He was on FUN. Well, we got to talking, and he insinuated that he would like to do, a talk show. I said, "Well, fine, let's do it." And so I put him on at night, and he was great. And and like I say, now you know the rest of the story.
Wow!
Because, and as a matter of fact, and this is something I'm very proud of, when he was at his peak, when he had the TV show and everything else, one Christmas this package shows up from Morton Downey Jr. And I open it up, and it's a small statue of an elephant. And with it is a note that says, "Like an elephant, I never forget." And I thought that was just,
wow.
He didn't have to do that, and that is still, in fact, I still have the note. I still have it at my desk. And and I have the elephant sitting up on a shelf in our family room.
Yeah, I remember Morton Downey Jr. on WWR Channel 9, and then it went national a year later, but only lasted 1 year in syndication. Then a year after that, he was a semi-frequent panelist on the 1990 to 91 version of To Tell the Truth. And I remember...
Oh, yeah, he went on. He had a great career.
And then he later had his own show in Palm Springs called Downey, and the announcer of that was Al Lohman of the legendary L.A. team Lohman and Barkley, yeah.
Oh, gosh. I met them one time when I was out in L.A. and was taking a tour of the station. They were on the air.
Yeah, KFI 640.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember Al Lohman always had these funny things that he was like, I wonder what's coming up next, into and out of the break for the Downey show. And then he was like, Mr. Downey's wardrobe furnished by Guy Lombardo. Guy Lombardo, we make everyone look good, even Mort.
Oh, God. Well, when I met him, and and Loman and Barkley were doing the mornings out there at KFWB, that's when they were doing the Loman and Barkley Lemonade. Loman and Barkley Lemonade. But they were, and I will say this. I was very, very blessed because I got in radio at the right time. It was the respected media. I had the ability to meet and work with some of the most talented people in the world. And I was also fortunate enough to get out of radio at the right time and go to work at Disney. And I worked at Walt Disney World at the right time when it was expanding, and we opened Epcot, and we had the studios, and our VP of marketing, Michael Eisner, thought he was the greatest thing in the world, so we could do anything we wanted to. And I remember it was so wonderful. We used to call them urinal decisions. We all had our offices on the same floor at the Sunbank building, and if you ran into like Elrod or Lingell at the urinal and said, I got an idea, and they go, well, fine, go do it. And that was how we worked.
Wow.
That's how Disney World worked, and that's how we got promotions done. We just said, I got an idea. Well, fine, go do it. And that was when Disney just really exploded, and when we really, just took off.
Yeah,
I really believe at that time that and I still believe to this day, that during that time that the marketing department, the promotion department at Walt Disney World was probably the best corporate promotion department in corporate America.
Wow. Yeah, I remember that big expansion because I've never been to Disney World myself, but I, as a little kid, went to Disneyland all the time. My dad used to sell used records, tapestries, and turquoise at the Old Orange Drive-In Theater in Anaheim across the street from Angel Stadium. And so he'd sell there on Saturdays and Sundays. If he did well on Sunday, he'd pack up around noontime, and by 1 o'clock we'd be out of there and on our way to Disneyland. That's when you had the A, B, C, and E tickets, and then I think Disney World also had them as well.
Yeah.
If he didn't do so well, then we'd pack up around 3 o'clock and go to Knott's Berry Farm's park across the street called Knott's Lagoon, which got replaced by Camp Snoopy. But it was fun. I remember going on a bunch of rides, and I think Adventure Through Inner Space was free because Monsanto paid for it because they were the sponsor. But I'd love to go to Disney World someday. They still have the people mover there. Unfortunately, Disneyland, when they did the renovations about 25 years ago in Tomorrowland, they got rid of the people mover and replaced it with a roller coaster called the Rocket Rods, which sounded good on paper, but the problem was they didn't bank it correctly, and they lost the sponsorship, and it was built badly. And Bob Gurr, the ride designer, has designed just about every Disney ride he can think of, at least the system. I saw him a couple of years ago at a convention where a guy was auctioning off his Disneyland memorabilia. So when Bob Gurr saw the rocket ride, he was like freaking out about it because it was such a lemon of a ride. But yeah,
I don't remember that at all. I don't ever remember. That must have been before my time. Must have been way before my time.
Well, it was only at Disneyland for a very short time. It was only on for about not even a year and a half.
Yeah, when I was there, I was out at Disneyland, I guess 2 or 3 times. We would have meetings out there or something, and also out at the studios. I loved going out at the studios and just wandering through the sound stages because that's when they were shooting. They had a lot of shows they shot out there. and just to walk through the sets was a lot of fun for me because I was just such a freak, a media freak, and just to walk through the sets of some of the shows they were shooting and the movies I loved it. So every time I'd go to California, I'd always go out and spend a day or two out at the studios too.
Wow. Now, when you got to go through the studios, did you get to roam by yourself? Or did you have somebody kind of walk you through?
No, I just wandered around.
Wow.
No, I worked there. I had on my Disney badge, but my ID, and so I just wandered around by myself.
Wow, that's great. And
I loved it. It was great. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And you also got to meet a bunch of rock and roll stars, from the Beach Boys to the Monkees.
Goodness, yes.
What were your memories
I worked with everybody who was hot during those years.
Wow. Who was the nicest musician you got to meet?
Jimmy Clanton. Without question. Clanton, I was at the University of Florida, and we brought him in to do what we call summer frolics, and I went up to, and he flew into Jacksonville, and I drove up to Jacksonville and picked him up at the airport, drove back to Gainesville. We stopped at the radio station. I was on DVH at the time. We did an interview. He put on just an absolutely fabulous show, and then I took him back to the airport. And he was just one of the absolute nicest, most humble, gentle people I had met. But, I found that really the bigger they were, the nicer they were. I like with the Beach Boys. Got to know Al Jardine, and he was just I worked with the Beach Boys several times and met him and knew them all, but he was one of the nicest, and probably the one. I got to tell you a quick story about this. Mm-hmm. Probably the one star that I got to know better than anybody else was Paul Revere. And Revere, well, almost every place I worked, Revere was always, Paul Revere and the Raiders were always the headline group of the Dick Clark Caravan of Stars. And so I worked with him several times and got to know him. And after that, he was playing, when we were in Miami, he was playing one of the hotels out on Miami Beach. And I went out to see him. The Raiders, Paul Revere and the Raiders, but it was Revere and what he would call the baby Raiders, a bunch of kids. Mark Lindsay wasn't there anymore. Oh, I had met Mark Lindsay, too. He was also another super neat guy. In fact, when he came to Miami, he called me on the phone at the station. He said, Paul said if I go to Miami, I should give you a call. I said, great. So I met him for drinks, and we had drinks and dinner and had a wonderful evening together. Anyhow, back to the Revere story. So I go on and say, Paul, I said, would you like to get out of this rat race for just a day and come out to the house and relax? He said, I would love it. So I went out the next morning, picked him up, brought him out to our house in Miami. We had a pool. And that afternoon, he's out floating around, one of those rafts in the pool. And I'm sitting out there on a chase lounge, and he's floating around the pool. And he says, Tom, he says, you really know how to live. Well, being the smart ass that I was, I said, well, Paul, when you make as much money as I do, you can live like this too. And when I said that, he sat right straight. I'll never forget this. He sat right straight up on that float, got very serious, and he said, he said, I make a lot of money and have no time to enjoy it. And I never forgot that. In a lot of speeches I do, I use that, and I say, do not get so wrapped up in your job that you forget to live, because you only get one shot at it. I will never forget that.
Wow. That is definitely a good lesson for all of us to remember, because it's so easy to get caught up in work. You also got to meet the McCoys with Rick Derringer, and Rick.
Oh my goodness! Yeah. Well, actually, it was back. Yeah. It was back when his name was. Actually, his real name was Rick Zeringer.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And he changed it to Derringer when he got with the McCoys. But I worked with him at SAI when he had a group called Rick and the Raiders. And they had to change the name because of Paul Revere and the Raiders, so they changed the name to the McCoys. So the McCoys were Rick and the Raiders before they were the McCoys. But once Sloopy came out, they couldn't use Rick and the Raiders, so they had to use that's when they went to the McCoys.
Wow.
But yeah, I worked with him for a long time, and gosh, even when I was out at Disney, he called one day. just out of the clear blue sky, he called just to say, hey. He was. I wouldn't say he was a good friend, but he was a friend.
Mm. And in fact, he later on produced Weird Al Yankovic's records for much of the 1980s as well, and of course had the solo hit "Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo."
Oh yeah, no, I remember that very, very well. Yeah, yeah, no, he was a super, a super nice guy and a great talent. He was, extremely talented. Working with the Beatles, you don't really get close to the Beatles. You introduced them. Mm-hmm. It was out at Crosley Field in Cincinnati. The stage was out around second base. And once we introduced them, I just walked around and stood right there in front of the stage and looked up and watched their whole show. They were on stage for 28 minutes, did 11 songs, and that was their show. The Monkees were very easy to work with. Of course, they were a contrived group, and they came through when they were, really, really big. Now this one is really kind of funny, and I have some pictures to back this one up. Mm-hmm. When the Monkees came to Cincinnati, have you ever been to Cincinnati?
I never have. I want to go someday.
Okay, well, at that time, probably the nicest hotel was a Holiday Inn. And it was one of those, back then in the 60s, they built the big tall ones that were circular.
Oh, yeah.
And, that's where the Monkees stayed. And I have a picture up in the room of Mike Nesmith, and there's a picture where I have a radio, we're dialing in the station, theoretically. Mm-hmm. Well, between each one of those floors, they had a concrete slab that went out, kind of like a rib in a backbone or something. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, we're standing there in his room, and they're up on like the 15th, 16th floor or something like that. And all of a sudden, we see a knock at the window. And we look up, and there's Davy Jones standing out there on the ledge.
Oh.
And my heart jumps up into my throat because he had walked down from his room to Nesmith's room along that ledge. And I, as calm as I could, said, open the window and get him in here. I couldn't believe it. Then there were the Beatles.
And we're speaking with former radio personality, program director, as well as head of marketing for Walt Disney World, Tom Kennington. And next time, he will share with us what happened, the unusual story about when the Fab Four came to Cincinnati.